Okay, so we're going to take a look at Chaf Hey today, but first, on Chaf Daled Amud Beis, we have a statement of Rav, Amar Rav Kulam Poslim B'Kuhuna. So the Mishnah at the beginning of the third parak lists a number of cases where the get is possible, like for example, if it wasn't written Lishma, or for example, we have a case of Hareat Mugureshes Mimeni V'iat Muteres L'chol Odom. That's called Shir Beget. And in all these cases, argues Rav that if she received such a get that's possible from her husband who's a Kohen, then she's Psul L'Kuhuna. She becomes a Grusha on a D'Rabbanan level, which is called Reach HaGet. Chutz Min HaRishon. However, Rav says that if the get was written Shalol Lishma, for example, let's say the Sofer was writing Lislamed, he was just learning the trade, then says Rav, it doesn't even have a Reach HaGet. It's not like the case of Shiur where he leaves out certain people and he wasn't Matir Halachol Adam. But nevertheless, he was mafkia his ishus, and therefore it's a reach haget. But Shmuel Omar, af rishon nami posel. Shmuel says that even in the case of a get, which was written by a sofer lislamed, and it's not lishma, it's also a reach haget that passes halakahuna as a grush of Yazda Shmuel Tamei, and Shmuel is very consistent. The Omar Shmuel kol bokom sheshanu chachamim shaget posel, whenever you find in the language of the Mishnah that the get is posel, then what it means is posel uposel. And posel means that she cannot get married, but posel means she cannot marry Kohen. And Shmuel finds a parallel halacha in the case of chalitza. When the Chachamim say chalitzasa psula, it means psula, and she's not allowed to marry anyone else min hashuk. But posalta min ha'achin. Nevertheless, she cannot be misyabim to any of the other brothers because she did have a maisa chalitza. So that Shmuel puts all the emphasis on a maisa chalitza to generate an isra on the achim. And similarly, in get, if there was a maisa nesinas haget, even though the get was posel, that maisa will posel her from kahuna. B'marava amri mishmei Reb Elazar. Now, marava obviously refers to Eretz Yisrael. And in the name of Reb Elazar, chalitza, if it was done on the left foot rather than the right foot, or if it was performed at night rather than during the day, psulos uposlos. She's not allowed to get married to anyone in the shuk, but she likewise is excluded from yibum to all the other brothers. And now we turn to Daf Chaf Hey. Katan, if a Katan did chalitza, so it means that the brother died and left a brother who's a Katan, the anpilia, and these are soft shoes that are made only from a garment, a bad, but not from leather, psulos, the ein poslos. So it means that a katan is not capable of a maisa chalitza. And likewise, if the minol is not made of leather, that's not a maisa chalitza. So in these cases, the chalitza is psula, meaning she cannot marry anyone else from the shuk. And not only that, but she still falls for a valid yibum to her brothers. That's not called a maisa chalitza. And the differentiation here is between the case of Lila or Smol, where you have a Maisa Chalitza, but it's possible, as opposed to Katan and Anpilio, which is not even a Maisa Chalitza. Zeiri Omar, Zeiri disagrees with Rav and with Shmuel, and he holds Ein Poselin Chutz Min Achron, that the only time the get will generate an Iser on Kahuna as Reach HaGet is when a Baal is married to two wives, and he says to the Kohen, he says to the Sofer, write me a get, and I'll decide later on which of my two wives I want to divorce. In such a case, says the Iri, she becomes Psula Lakuna, and that qualifies as Reich HaGet. In all the other cases in the Mishnah, including the cases that Shmuel classified as Reich HaGet, for example, if it was Shalol Lishma, I'm sorry, if it was, just let me go over it one more time. Rav says Chutz Min HaRishon. So it means, even if we accept Rav Shita, that in the case of Shalol Lishma, it does not generate Reich HaGet, and certainly Zeiri would accept that, he would reject Shmuel in the case of Shalol Lishma, and he would say there's no Reich HaGet. But in the case of Kosav Le'ezim and Sheyirtza, Le'ezim and Sheyirtza Garesh, that is considered Reich HaGet and Pasels HaLekahuna. The Asder of Yochanan. Oh, wait a minute. V'chein amar Rav Asi kulam ein posum chutz min achron. Rav Asi accepts the sheet of Zeiri. Rav Yochanan amar af achron nami ein posel. Rav Yochanan is the most lenient of all the shitos, and he holds that even in a case of Li'eza she'ertza garish, which Zeiri and Rav Asi agreed was Reach HaGet apostle lakuna, Rav Yochanan says there's no Reach HaGet. The Asder of Yochanan L'tameh. Rav Yochanan is very consistent. The Omer Rabbi Asi. Omer Rav Yochanan, ha'achim shecholku lekuchosein umachzirin zeh lazeh biyovel. So you have a Yerusha, and the brothers divide up the Yerusha amongst themselves. And now the question is, what happens in Yovel? We have halacha that lokeach, somebody who buys a field, the field goes back to the original owner with Yovel. What about in the case of Yerusha, when each person amongst the heirs is Koneh's chelik v'Yerusha, and what happens is, let's say you have two brothers. So Reuven says, I'll take the field on the north, and I will pay you the field on the south, and vice versa, Shimon. So it would seem like there's a kind of quid pro quo exchange. And that's exactly the point of Rabbi Yochanan, that when they divvy it up, they're really simply exchanging, swapping one for the other. And therefore, Machzirin Zelos Zebiovel, like any Lekuach, or any case of Lekuchos, the Sados go back to the original Bailim with Yovel. Utzricha. Now, what Rabbi Yochanan seems to be saying is Ein Brera. And therefore, we're not going to say that originally when the father died, this field was designated and inherited directly by Reuven, and this field was directly inherited by Shimon. No. We're not going to say that. We're going to say that when they divvy it up, they're swapping it one to the other. You take that one, I'll take this one. I'll give you this, and you give me that. And in the case of Li'ezer she'ertze agarish, Rabbi Yochanan is saying that ein brera. In other words, we're not going to say that later on when he decides to give the get to this Rachel as opposed to that Rachel, then that's Mavarel Mafreya, which Rachel was the get written for. No. So that's Rabbi Yochanan ein brera. And likewise, in the case of Achim Shecholku, Rabbi Yochanan is applying the principle of ein brera utzricha. We need both of them. Diet marbaha. If Rabbi Yochanan would have only said the din of ein brera in our mission in the case of Eretz Elit, Li'ezer she'ertz hagarish, b'hakam Rabbi Yochanan di ein brera. Why? Mishum teve'ina lishma. When the Torah requires lishma, it requires that the writing of the get be specifically for the purpose of divorcing this woman. And if he's unclear about which woman he wants to divorce, he just wants to tighten his belt and have only one wife instead of two. So in that case, that's not lishma, aval hasam. In the case of achim that are divvying up the estate of their father, we don't know what Rabbi Yochanan would say. Mecheru di Omar Achmana lahada beyovel, aval Yerusha matana umatana lo. Maybe the Torah is saying that only in the case of mecher, when there's a definite sale, then the Torah says that yovel impacts on that sale, and he has to give back the sada to its original owner. But in the case of Yerusha, it's very possible, and we'll talk about Matan as well, it's very possible that there's no chazar v'yovel. And we could apply the principle of brera to the case of Yerusha. Although Rabbi Yochanan says ain't brera in the case of Lishma, that's because the Torah requires Lishma. But in the case of Yerusha, maybe the Torah would allow you, Lemafreya, to determine which one of the brothers inherited which one of the fields. And therefore there would be no din of Chazar B'Yovel because it's not a Mecca. The Iashmenin Besada, if Rabbi Yochanan would have told me his din in Sada, when the brothers, the heirs, divvy up their father's estate, and Rabbi Yochanan says, Yesh Brera, and Rabbi Yochanan says, Ein Brera, therefore there's Chazar B'Yovel, we would have said, Mishum Dilachumra, with regard to the mitzvah of Yovel, Rabbi Yochanan took a machmir position. Inami kitchila. Or we would say that Rabbi Yochanan held his din only with regard to Yovel because machzirna sasod zelazeh. We return the fields one to the other as it was in the beginning, before they divvied it up. Amal hachem alo, but maybe in the case of get, we're not going to say that Rabbi Yochanan holds ein brera. Maybe here in the case of get, when he decides which of the two wives with the same name he wants to divorce, that's called brera. And Rabbi Yochanan, although he holds ein brera in the case of a sadeh that was divvied up by the heirs, that was a chumrah based on the mitzvah of Yovel. But as far as get is concerned, maybe Rabbi Yochanan would hold yesh brera. Boy minei Rabbi Oshia mei Rabbi Yehuda. Amal Lavlor is a sofer. The Baal commissions the sofer. Ksovli get li'ezeh mishtei noshim shetetzeh bepesach tchila. Whichever wife of mine, she has both wives have the same name, will step out of the house first. That's the one that you should write the get for. Mo, what's the din in this case? Can we say yesh brera? And when this particular Rachel, we'll call it Rachel the first, walks out of the Pesach first, then we have clarity now that the get was written for that Rachel the first. Or should we say Ein Beira? The get is possible. It was not written Lishma. Amalei, so Rabbi Yehuda responds to the Surah. We learned this in the Mishnah. Yes, Amikan. Amar lelavlok sov liezesh eretz hagarish pasul legarish bo alma Ein Beira. So why does Rav Oshi have a suffix vacillating back and forth about Liezer shetetze Pesach Tchila? That's Brera. And the Mishnah itself says that it's possible because of Ein Brera. So how could you even entertain the idea that Yesh Brera in Get Esvei? Now Rav Oshi comes back and he asks Akasha to Rabbi Yehuda from the Mishnah Psachim, Omer lebanav hareish shokeres haPesach al mishi al michem rishon Yishalayim. I'm going to shech the Korban Pesach on behalf of that son of mine who comes first to Yerushalayim. Now we know that in the case of Pesach we need Sela Beis over Sela Bayis, and you can only shech the korban on behalf of someone who owns a portion of the korban pesach. That's called minui for the bnei achavura. Now, in this particular case, we don't know, we cannot know who is the first one to make it to Yerushalayim. And therefore becomes a Brera situation when we find out later which of the brothers will make it first to Yerushalayim. And the Mishnah Psachim Peites establishes that Kevin Shenichnas Rishon, Rosho Verubo, Zocha Bechelko, Umezakes Echov Imo. Once the first brother to make it to Yerushalayim, and this is already after the Shchitas HaKorban, but he enters into Yerushalayim Rosho Verubo, then we're going to paskin Yesh Brera, and Huvrar Hisbara Double Mafresh HaKorban Nishchat Lishmo Zocha Bechelka Umezakes Echav Imo. He's allowed to give from his chelik in the Korban Pesach and share it with his brothers. Because once we say Yesh Brera, then Huvar Adavar L'Mafreya Shakorban Nishchat L'Shem Misha Nichnas Yerushalayim Rishon V'hu Mezake L'Shar Echov Michelko. Now, what does that mean? Mezake Michelko LeEchov. There's no minui on a korban after the shechita. So we're going to have to say that the father who shechted the Korban Pesach, he had a very all-encompassing, all-embracing kind of kavanah. His kavanah was both for the person who will come first to Yerushalayim and for the person that first person wants to share the Korban Pesach with them. Amar le, Rabbi Yehuda responds to Hoshaya Bri, my son, Ma inyan psach v'etzel Gittin. What kind of analogy are you making between psachim and our Mishnah in Git? Hoyt Marla. With regard to the Mishnah in Psach, we have a statement of Rabbi Yochanan. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Kidei Lizarzan b'mitzvahs. When the father said he's being makna the korban to the first person to come to Yerushalayim, he's trying to excite them and get them motivated to hurry up to come to Yerushalayim for the Korban Pesach. But really, he appointed all of them And he had in mind all of them when he shechted the carbon. And therefore, the fact that they can all eat the carbon is because he, the father, only said the first one to the exclusion of the others, only Kedei Lazarus, and he didn't really mean to exclude the others. So the Shchitas HaKarban, therefore, was on behalf of all of the brothers. And that has nothing to do with Yesh Breira. All the brothers were already menuyim on the carbon. Tekanami. We have now a diuk from the words of Rabbi Yochanan. I mean to say, we have a diuk from the Mishnah in support of Rabbi Yochanan. Kevan shenichnas rishon rosho v'rubo zocha b'chelko u'mezakes acher echov imo. If you did say that he appointed all of them from the get-go before the Shkita Shapir, now I can understand why they all could eat from the Korban Pesach. If you're going to tell me that the case was that he didn't appoint all of them on the Korban Pesach, how could they join after the Shkita and be part of the Benuyim on the Korban Vatnan? We have a Mishnah in Psachim Peites, Nimninu Moshkin Yedem Mimenu Achi Shochet. If a person wants to be money on the Korban Pesach, or a person who's already money wants to jump ship, so to speak, Lim Shalch Yodo Mikorban Zel, Lismanas HaKorban Acher, Yochel HaSozos. But when can he do this? Only before the Shkitas HaKarbon. After the Shkitas HaKarbon, he can't be manui, he can't become a manui, and he can't remove his minui. So therefore, if the Achim were not appointed, were not part of the Chabura, the minui, before the Shkita, how could they possibly eat for the Korban Pesach? Korban Pesach is only eaten limnuya. So it must mean that Shelo Omar Ken El Zarzam b'mitzvahs, but they were all minuyim. Tanya Nami Hachi. We're going to bring a brayso to support this idea that according to Rabbi Yochanan, the kavanah of the father was only the zarzam b'mitzvahs. Ma'aseh v'kodmu banos lebanim. Who came to Yerushalayim first? It was the girls. They came before the boys. B'nitzu banos rizas ubanim shvelim. Right, the banos get an A plus for alacrity. Now, it doesn't say here in the Brisa or in the Mishnah that the banos were zoch in the karma and the banim were not zoch in the karma. It says that the banos was rizos yosem and abonim. So it implies that the Av was mamana all of them on the carbon. And when he said al misha yala rishon, he was only saying it in order to be mezarzam b'mitzvos. Amar Abaye kaboy minei. Rav Hoshea asked the question to Rav Yehuda if there's breira in the case of tola b'das acher. When he says ezo shetirtzeh, or Eza Shetetze v'Pesach Tchila, that's called Toli B'das Acher. And the question is there breira in such a case? Because Poshetle, Rav Yehuda was poshet this suffix, and he said, no, there's no breira in a case of Toli B'das Atzmo. When he says Liezo she'ertze agaresh, be'chodar mosifle, and then Rabbi Oshia, after asking a kasha on Rabbi Yehuda from the case of Tolad Das Acherim, which means Banav, so when he said Al Manashi Yala Mikem Rishon Yerushalayim, we could say that he's Dafka Tola B'das Atzma, and therefore in Breira. But Kevan Shetolas Ador B'daito, Muchach shadayin lo achriya v'daito malasos who posech al shtei ha'seifim. So again, we're going to say that if he's told v'das acherim yesh breira, but in a case where he's not really sure, and he's told v'das atzmo, then we're going to say ein breira. So let's go back to Abaye now. Abaye is raising an objection, a question on the Masu Matan, the diun back and forth between Rav Oshia and Rav Yehuda. Rav Oshia asked Rav Yehuda if there's breira in the case of Tola V'das Atzmo. And the answer was ain't breira, but in Tola V'das Acherim, that's a horse of a different color. And when Rav Oshia responded to the question, Hodar Mosif law, Mosif Miloshan Kusha, that Rav Oshia now comes back and asks a kasha on the answer that he was given by Rav Yehuda, which was a case of Tola B'das Acherim in Al Mishayala Michem Rishon Yerushalayim. Okay, it could be that Dafka in the case of Tola B'das Atzmo and Brera, he hasn't really made a decision yet. He's wavering back and forth. But if he's told B'das Acherim, then he made a definite decision, and Yesh Brera. So what's happening here is that Abaye objects to the Masu Matan between Rav Oshia and Rav Yehuda. Because Rav Oshia asked one question, and that was Tola B'das Acherim in Ezo Shetetze V'Pesach Tchila. And Rav Yehuda responded by proving that Ein Brera from a case of Tola V'das Atzmo in the case of Eliezer Shertze Agarish. And then Rav Oshia comes back and he asks a kasha on the answer of Rav Yehuda from the case of Tola V'das Acherim. In the case of Misha Yala Michem Rishon Yerushalayim, he was asking about a case of Eliezer Sher Teitze B'Pesach Tchila. So that's called Tola V'das Acherim. And Rabbi Yehuda answered his question that Ein Brera from a case of Tola V'das Atzmo Eliezer Shertze Agarish. And when Rabbi Hoshaya comes back and he asks a kasha on the answer, the response that he got from Yehuda, he invokes the case of Tola V'das Acherim of Al Misha Yala Michem Rishon Yerushalayim. Maybe dafka in the case of Tola V'das Atzmo we say Ein Brera, but not in the case of Tola V'das Acherim. Omar Rava my kusha. I don't accept the kasha of Abaye. Why? Dilma de Islay Brera, according to the Mandiyom who holds from Brera, Lo Shna Tola V'das Atzmo, Lo Shna V'Tola V'das Acher V'Islay Brera. There's no difference between Tola Tano V'das Atzmo as opposed to Tola Tano V'das Acher. It's always Yesh Brera. Uman de Leslay Brera. He also Lo Shna Tola V'das Acher Atzmo, Lo Shna Tola V'das Acher Leslay Brera. And now Rav Masharshi is going to raise a kasha on Rav. How can you tell me, Rav, that there's no distinction between Tol B'das Atzmo and Tol B'das Acherim? But Rav Yehuda, the Tol B'das Atzmo, less leibrer. The Tol B'das Acherim is leibrer. So you see that Rabbi's kasha was correct. There's a difference between Tol B'das Atzmo and Tol B'das Acherim. Because in Tol B'das Acherim, he made a definite decision. And therefore, yesh brer. Where did Rav Masharshi find that Rav Yehuda holds that Tol B'das Atzmo less leibrer, but Tol B'das Acherim is leibrer? The Sanya we learned in the Brayso, Lokech Yain mi bein hakusim. And they're choshed on Trumas and Maisros. Now he wants to drink from the wine. He doesn't have Kelim Tahorim to put the Truma and the Maser into those Kelim. Omer, he could declare, Shnei Lugim, 2 of the Lugim on this Chavis. Shani Yosit Lahafrish, that when I have Kelim, I'll be Mafrish them. Harei Hein Truma, the Truma's Chal. The Asara, and he has an additional 10 lugim, which is Asiris Mimash Nishar B'chavis. Right, it's 1/10 of that which is left in the chavis. Maisarishan Levi, and then Taisha Lugim, an additional Taisha Lugim is Maser Shein. So Maisarishan Levi. And then another 9 that are given to, that are sanctified with Maser Shein, which means that he has to bring it up to Yerushalayim or be potent. Okay, I think this is where we can go for today because the sugya now gets very, very complicated. Would require a lot more time than we have.
Okay, all right. Go ahead.
All right, so let me wish you a great week and thank you.
Yeah, you too.
All right, regards.
Have a good week. Okay.